Hi, everyone. Let's get into the next episode of Love, Lust, and Sexual Desire, the U.S. Presidency in the Bedroom. So, let's jump into it. Quote, I have never gone to sleep or waked up without thinking of her, and I doubt if an hour has passed that I have not thought of her. These are the words a young Teddy Roosevelt wrote in his private journals about his future wife, Alice Hathaway Lee. The 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., or Teddy as he was popularly known, served from 1901 to 1909. He was a legendary president who was renowned for his liberal views, limitless vigor, and adventurous attitude. But a love tale that captivated his heart was going on in the background, and it's one that shaped him into the president that we all know today. The two met during their time at Harvard University, and for Teddy, it was love at first sight. He was enamored by her intelligence, beauty, and charm. Teddy and Alice discovered a strong bond that went beyond conventional standards, despite having different upbringings. They were similar in their passion for exploration and their desire to make a difference in the world. After just a 15-month courtship, they announced their engagement on no other day than Valentine's. And just 8 months later, they exchanged vows on October 27th, 1880. Teddy and Alice were deeply in love, and they were firmly supportive of one another throughout their marriage. The newlyweds made their home in New York City, where Theodore began his political career as a precinct worker before quickly winning the election to the state assembly. Following his election, the two moved up to Teddy's Albany boarding house in October 1882, where he studied New York state politics. The Roosevelts prepared for a big family and purchased property close to Tranquility, which is a family home of the Roosevelts, for a huge house when Alice got pregnant in the summer of 1883. Later that autumn, she moved back in with her mother-in-law in New York City, as she was quite far along in her pregnancy and wanted to be closer to family and not have to travel right after giving birth, while Teddy had to stay in Albany. Alice was Teddy's foundation of support, providing him with direction and counsel throughout his political career, specifically during his time as an assemblyman in New York. Teddy, for his part, valued Alice's independence and intelligence. Teddy's zest for exploration was completely embraced by Alice, who joined him on hunting expeditions and other outdoor adventures. During their time apart, Teddy and Alice exchanged hundreds of letters, which showed just how deep their love really was. One dated November 5th, 1881, Teddy wrote, quote, My fairest and sweetest little wife, I too longed for you when I received your darling letter, that I could hardly contain my desire to see you. O my sweetest, I live, love, pray for nothing but that I may be worthy of you. You are the light and the sunshine of my life, and I can never cease thinking of the good God who gave you to me. I could not live without you, my sweet, fair-mouthed, fair-haired darling, and I care for nothing whatever else but you. I wish for nothing but that I have you to love and cherish all the days of my life, and you have been more to me than any other wife could be to any other husband. You were all in all my heart's darling, and I care for nothing else that you have given me more than I can ever repay. End quote. But Teddy was not the only one who admired Alice. Alice was very popular among New York socialites. She was adored dearly by just about everyone she met and was nicknamed Sunshine after her bubbly and warm personality. She was seen as the epitome of contemporary progressive women. The media and the general public paid great attention to her wardrobe choices and public appearances, and undoubtedly she would have made a magnificent First Lady. But unfortunately, she never got the chance. On February 12th, 1884, at 8:30 p.m., Alice gave birth to the couple's daughter, who was given the name Alice Lee Roosevelt. Teddy, at the time, was in Albany on the assembly floor. Teddy was certain that their child would be born on Valentine's Day, the 4th anniversary of their engagement, but he was no less excited when he was 2 days off. In the first days of February 1884, Teddy had received a telegram from home saying that his mother, Mittie, was unwell. Then, a telegraph dated February 13th proclaimed the arrival of Teddy's new baby girl. He received congratulations from his assembly friends and prepared to travel home when he received a second telegraph informing him that Alice was also sick. When he arrived home in a hurry, his brother Elliot greeted him and remarked, quote, "If you want to see your baby," he said, "do so before you come into this house. She is over at your Aunt Gracie's. There is a curse on this house. Mother is dying and Alice is dying too." Teddy found his wife hardly able to recognize him, so he sat at the head of her bed and held her all night except for one short period, during which time he watched his mother. His mother passed away just before 3 in the morning from typhoid fever, and Teddy, standing beside her bed, reiterated his brother's remarks, "There's a curse in this house." He returned upstairs after that, and day dragged into dawn, and on February 14th, at 2 o'clock, Alice passed away from Bright's disease, which had debilitated her body on the 4th anniversary of their engagement. Teddy was heartbroken by Alice's passing and seldom ever mentioned her after that. He tore pages from his journal and burned almost all the letters that they had exchanged over the years, only revealing a diary entry and a brief, privately published homage when his wife passed away. On that February of the 14th, Teddy wrote in his diary a big X and wrote the words, quote, "The light has gone out of his life," and nothing more. He said after the pair's funeral, Perez in his mother's and Alice's, they had a double funeral, "For joy or for sorrow, my life has now been lived out." In a tribute to Alice a year later, Teddy wrote, quote, "She was beautiful in face and form, and lovelier still in spirit. As a flower she grew, and as a fair young flower she died. Her life had always been the sunshine. There had never come to her a single sorrow, and none ever knew her who didn't love her and revere her for the bright, sunny temper and her saintly unselfishness. Fair, pure, and joyous as a maiden, loving, tender, and happy. As a young wife, when she'd just become a mother, when her life seemed to just begun, and when the years seemed so bright for her. Then, by a strange, terrible fate, death came to her, and my heart's dearest died. The light went from my life forever." Unquote. After this tragedy, Teddy put all his effort into his job and in the assembly, and worked arduously to win the Republican Party the presidency in 1884. However, just before the election, Teddy left for a property in the Dakota Territory that he had bought a year before, close to Medora. He had fallen in love with the West since it provided an active outdoor lifestyle and an escape from the place that caused him so much pain. It was a place where he could cope with his loss among the livestock, animals, and rustic men for the next 2 years. During this time, Teddy left his sister Bammy, which was his nickname for her, with his young daughter Alice, named after her mother. In New York, he referred to the baby as Baby Lee because it was too hard for him to use her real name. And that is the story of Teddy Roosevelt's first wife. I think it's very clear that Teddy and Alice had a special relationship. They were each other's first love, and the loss of her had a profound effect on Teddy, who, by the way, was only 25 at the time that this happened, and Alice was 22. I think it's safe to say that Teddy never fully recovered from the loss of Alice, and even decades later he rarely spoke of her, and almost all their communications, like letters and notes, were destroyed. And this is part of the reason that for a very long time it was rumored and speculated that Teddy and Alice had a pretty awful marriage, because there was relatively not a lot of detailed first-person communication about their relationship and their love. And because of this lack of evidence at all, it was sort of speculated that they had a very bland and basic relationship that was just not very affectionate, when it's now come out in recent years that that was not true after more letters and communications have been uncovered. And I have no doubt in my mind that Teddy and Alice were deeply in love. So I think that should be cleared up for anyone who learned differently in the school or whatever. They undoubtedly had a beautiful marriage, and it's truly tragic that they couldn't be there for each other for much longer, and that she passed away so young. But Teddy did remarry, and After drought and blizzards had killed off most of his herd in the Dakotas in 1886, he went back to New York. Teddy never looked back on his years in the Dakotas with sorrow, even though he was ready to get back into politics. He always thought that if he hadn't gone west, he would have never become president. When he got back, he went right into politics by running for mayor of New York and as a Republican. On one of his trips back to New York, Teddy ran into Edith Kermit Caro, a childhood friend. When he went back to the East Coast, they started to talk more often. It's rumored that Edith and Teddy had a teenage romance, but that was never confirmed. But the two remained friends throughout Teddy's relationship with Alice. Teddy reunited with Edith at his sister's house a year and a half after the passing of Alice. They decided to keep their engagement a secret while Edith's mother carried out her plans to relocate the family to Europe after being engaged in November 1885. Edith Caro moved to London with her mother and sister while Teddy stayed back in the U.S. Teddy went across the Atlantic Ocean to get married to her a year later. During his journey, he met British Ambassador Cecil Spring Rice and became fast friends with him. Interestingly, Spring Rice was the best man at Teddy's wedding. The Roosevelts were wed not too soon after, December 2nd, 1886, in London. After their honeymoon, the two moved back to the United States and built a home in Sagamore Hill, located at Oyster Bay, Long Island. Teddy once remarked, quote, "I utterly disbelieve and disapprove of second marriages. I've always considered that they argued weakness in a man's character," end quote. But obviously something about Edith changed his mind. Edith and Teddy had a happy marriage. Edith was a devoted mother and took great care and pride in raising the children. Over the course of their marriage, Teddy and Edith had 5 kids together and also raised Alice from Teddy's first marriage. Edith was insistent that, quote, "that child will become my child. She will come and live with us, and we will be one big family together," which was really lovely of her to accept Alice so willingly into their family. Theodore, who was born in 1887, Kermit was born in 1889, Ethel was born in 1891, and Archibald was born in 1894, and Quentin, who was born in 1897, were the children that Edith and Teddy had together. If the 6 children weren't already a challenge on their own, Teddy and Edith also had a variety of animals to consider. A lizard, a bear, a badger, a hyena, a one-legged rooster, a pony, and guinea pigs were among the family's various pets at different times including their time at the White House. Teddy was assigned to the U.S. Civil Service Commission in 1888 and worked there until 1895. After the birth of Kermit Roosevelt on October 10th, 1889, Edith and their kids relocated to Washington to live with Teddy. The family relocated back to New York City in 1895. The year Teddy was appointed to the police commissioner. And after being appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1897, the family relocated back again to Washington. When the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, Teddy resigned from his position as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy and joined the Army as Lieutenant Colonel to command a volunteer cavalry unit. In Cuba, San Juan and Kettle Hills were scaled by the unit, known as the Rough Riders. Upon Teddy's return, he was a national hero for his efforts, and it paid off as his popularity landed him his dream job as the governor of New York. In 1900, Teddy was up for re-election for his governorship, and some of his policies had annoyed some of the leaders of the Republican Party at the time. Because of this, they didn't want him to run again, and instead wanted Teddy in a position where he could effectively do nothing. The position was ironically the vice presidency under the incumbent William McKinley. After his nomination, Mark Hanna, a Republican national chairman who was against the nomination of Teddy as vice president, famously stated, quote, "Don't any of you realize there's only one life between that madman and the presidency?" Teddy didn't even want the position, but he reluctantly agreed, thinking that he could possibly get enough support to run for president in 1904. Obviously, this whole situation was incredibly ironic, as only 6 months after McKinley's inauguration, he was assassinated, and Teddy Roosevelt became the 26th and youngest president of the United States at the ripe age of 42. Obviously, the presidency was extremely sudden and undoubtedly took a toll on the marriage of Teddy and Edith, but Edith was, for the most part, pretty used to public life because of her husband's past jobs. Although Edith preferred to be called Miss Roosevelt, as a First Lady she was widely adored, and the two made a great team. Edith made many lasting contributions to her husband's presidency, as well as the role of the First Lady in the public's mind. Edith's strength had always been in the home, and as a First Lady, this was no different. Edith renovated much of the White House to make it more of a home for the family, and she took great pride in preserving the history of the house. But what she adored most was spending time as a family. The family often took trips back to their home in Long Island, and even bought a cabin in Virginia, where the family would escape to during the first years in Washington to disconnect. Edith was very supportive of Teddy, especially during his presidency, when he needed it the most. Although she tried to keep herself separate from his administration, Edith occasionally found herself being an essential part of his administration as a trusted advisor. All her efforts didn't go unnoticed by Teddy, who publicly exclaimed about his wife that she had, quote, the power of being the best of wives and mothers, the wisest manager of the household, and at the same time, the ideal great lady and mistress of the White House. Edith and Teddy had a beautiful family, and Teddy finally got the happily ever after that he deserved and missed out on with his first wife. I think that the story of Teddy Roosevelt is obviously tragic, but what I think is more remarkable is the lack of information about this side of his life. Teddy is known historically for his actions as president, rightfully so, but he was also a man who experienced remarkable love and loss in his life, which ultimately shaped him into the man that he ultimately became. Teddy was deep down a lover boy. He was loyal and dedicated to his wife and family, and no wonder to me why the teddy bear was named after the famous president. Maybe I'm a bit biased, as Teddy is one of my favorite, or at least, honestly, I don't know if he's my favorite, or he definitely is top 2 or 3 of all time. But I think that he deserves the credit and recognition for all the historical things he did for the country, as well as how he treated his family. One of my favorite things that I learned about Teddy when I was researching was how progressive he really was for this time period, even as a young man. At Harvard, he felt very strongly about equal treatment and rights for all, especially women. I remember he gave a speech when he was supposed to talk about his senior thesis. He instead gave a speech about how women should be no more a man's property than a man should be a woman's property, which is obviously a very revolutionary idea for the time period. But I think he stood by in that belief in both of his marriages. He truly, in my opinion, adored both of his wives and treated them as such. He was a great husband, president, and ultimately just a good and kind-hearted guy. After his death, Teddy was buried alongside his wife and his children at Young's Memorial Cemetery in Oyster Bay Cove in New York, near their home. And that is the story of the love and loss of Teddy Roosevelt. I think that, this story is so sad, but also really beautiful. Teddy gave his all to not only his work, but also his family, and he really, truly loved them. He was a great dad, and there were issues in his family. Alice Lee, which was his daughter from his first marriage, famously had problems with her relationship with her father. And I think that there are many reasons for this. Obviously, I think that Teddy, in some ways, had difficulty building a relationship with his daughter, given that she was really the only thing and a very obvious reminder of his wife, Alice. And she was a part of her, and that's the only part that he had left. And I'm sure that for him, that was difficult to navigate. And I'm sure that Alice knew this, as she famously felt and said that her father was, to her, a little closed off, and their relationship was quite public knowledge. Alice was known as a troublemaker and would frequently cause problems for her father and for the White House, probably just to annoy them, which is kind of funny. But they never really had the same relationship that I think that Teddy had with his other children, because of really how their relationship started, which was with the tragic death of Alice. And in their later years, I think that their relationship definitely progressed, but for a very long time, that was a major issue. And it was great that, Teddy's second wife was so accepting of Alice and brought them into her family, and I'm sure that that helped. But there was definitely a rift and some problems going on in their relationship that did really affect them, and that was pretty public for the time. And yeah, even with that, Teddy did, I'm sure, adore her, and he really was a great father and a great guy. And it's very sad that, Teddy's not around anymore. And I'm sure he would be a great president even today. And all of those Republicans who said that they didn't want Teddy to run for governor, they were right, because he was so much better as a president. And, I just absolutely adore him. And this story has only made me love him a little bit more, or a lot more, I can even say. But I hope that you learned something from this story, and I don't know, I want to know, how many of you guys knew that Teddy had a first wife? I don't remember learning about that in history class, or maybe I didn't, I just don't remember it. But I certainly didn't know all that I know now, and I don't know. Teddy's story just kind of breaks my heart, but is also really heartwarming and beautiful. And Teddy was amazing. And I don't know, I just love him. So I hope that you learned something from this episode, and that, you feel more connected to the story of Teddy Roosevelt, and that you can understand him a little bit better than you did 22 minutes ago. So anyways, goodbye. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.